I will now turn it over to our moderator for tonight, a member of the board for the Friends of the Library, Mary Weiss.
Thank you very much, Amanda. Good evening to everyone, and welcome to this virtual author talk with Scott Eyman discussing his latest book, Cary Grant, A Brilliant Disguise, which was released on October 20th, 2020. As Amanda said, my name is Mary Weiss. I am a member of the board of the Friends of the Westerly Library in Wilcox Park in Westerly, Rhode Island. And the Friends are collaborating tonight with the library in bringing you this virtual event. We are so pleased and fortunate to have Scott with us tonight. Scott is a New York Times best-selling author of 14 books on the golden age of Hollywood. He is the former book editor and art critic for the Palm Beach Post. He is a faculty member at the University of Miami School of Communications, teaching courses in film history. He lectures extensively throughout the world and writes book reviews for major publications. Scott lives in West Palm Beach with his wife, Lynn. Scott's book is a well-written, engaging biography of Cary Grant, who was born in 1904 and died in 1966. This biography is presented within the context of film and theatrical history. The book presents so many themes worthy of discussion and exploration. However, since our time is limited tonight, we'll focus on just a few of them that will hopefully not only engage you, but entice you to read Scott's book if you haven't already. These themes are the meaning and importance of the book's title, the subtitle rather, A Brilliant Disguise, presenting the conflict between Archie and Cary. Grant's development as an actor from a teenage Tumbler immigrating to the United States to escape a troubled childhood to stardom as a Hollywood icon. Grant's troubled marriages and bitter divorces, but his delight with his only child, Jennifer, his daughter with Diane Cannon, his fourth wife. Grant's extensive legal use of LSD during the 1950s and 1960s and why he was using it. And lastly, we'll focus on one movie, Suspicion, a film that Cary Grant made in 1941 that brought together one of his two favorite directors, Alfred Hitchcock, and Joan Harrison, a screenwriter who will be the subject of our next virtual author talk on February 18th with the author, Christina Lane. Now, Scott, if we could go back to the subtitle of this book, A Brilliant Disguise. You've said that your book subtitle is seductive and reminiscent of Grant's movies. What do you mean by that?
Well, I didn't have a title for the book for a couple of years, actually. And as I got deeper and deeper into him and into the book, it became very obvious to me that Cary Grant was an aspirational figure for Archie Leach. It was a part he played, and he had certain aspects that were similar. Clothes, the interest in clothes. He was very much a clothes hound all his life when he could afford it, which he couldn't as a child, but later on he could. The attractiveness to women, certain superficial characteristics that were carried over from his actual identity to Cary Grant. But there were an awful lot of aspects of Cary Grant that were not part of Archie Leach at all. So in that sense, Cary Grant was a performance for an actor who had been born Archie Leach, but changed his name to Cary Grant. And he was an aspirational figure, and that Cary Grant was a debonair and generally in control, even when he seemed to be out of control, where the comedy came from. But the performance was always under control because he was an extraordinarily gifted farceur. And it just struck me that the audience saw Cary Grant and thought there was a one-to-one basis between the actor and the what he played. And actually, I think his greatest performance was the one that took him over 30 years to perfect, which was the character known as Cary Grant, hence the title, A Brilliant Disguise.
Well, your title is brilliant. And I heard the comment that Cary Grant made, that he said, everyone wants to be Cary Grant. Even I want to be Cary Grant. Does
Yeah.
that sort of summarize what's going on with this man, this dichotomy within him?
Well, he was very open about the fact that he did not, that where he started was not where he finished. He said, which you develop a persona by imitating of actors that you admire, performers that you admire, and you basically imitate them. And eventually, as you work and work and work and do more and more work and get more expert at your craft, you develop a personality of your own, and you can gradually divest yourself of those aspects of your personality where you were basically being a magpie and just imitating performers you like. You can see the same thing in all the singing shows on television. You know, they're all imitating some other more successful singer, whether it's Lady Gaga or Jennifer Holliday or whoever it might be, or Aretha Franklin. It doesn't matter. But generally, all these kids young singers and are imitating an older singer because they don't have a style of their own. They don't necessarily have a musical persona of their own. So what they're doing is they're trying on different wardrobes, different vocal wardrobes to see what fits and whether or not they can pull it off. It's the same thing actors do. It's the same thing actors do. And that's what Cary Grant did. He was very open about it, that when he started out, he didn't have a technique particularly. He didn't have a persona particularly. So he tried to be a kind of amalgam of various English actors that he'd grown up watching on the stage. And when it came to comedy, it was various English comedians that he'd seen in the music hall, which was
You talk about, if I can digress for a minute here, let's go back to the beginning of his story. He was born in, I believe, Bristol, England.
Right.
Maybe you could give our audience a little sense of what his childhood was like, which I think would be a little different than what most of us might think it was.
Well, the family was on their best day lower middle class, and they might have been less than that. His father was an alcoholic pants presser and tailor. His mother was emotionally compromised. They had had a child previously that died. So Archie was actually the second child born to the marriage. The first child had died, and his mother told a long, involved story that the child had gotten, a boy, had gotten his finger caught in a door, and the finger got crushed in the door, and an infection set in, and the infection went to his brain and killed the child. The child's birth certificate, a death certificate rather, states that he died of meningitis. So he presumably died of meningitis, and the mother came up with a scenario that had very little relation to reality, which was her want. She was extraordinarily difficult, and because she had lost a child, her first child, she was hovered over Archie relentlessly, and basically instilled in him the belief that the price you paid for love was absolute slavish devotion, which is what she demanded from him. The mother and the father's name was Elias, the mother's name was Elsie. They didn't get along at all. The father resented her focus on the child, and it only increased his drinking. And the marriage eventually got so dicey that one day when Archie was 11, he came home from school, and where's mom? And his father told him that she'd gone to the coast, the sea. Well, Bristol's only 2 hours, not even 2 hours from the sea. It's probably 40 minutes from the sea. So she didn't have far to go. And a couple days go by, and he asks his father, where's mom? She's still there. And somehow over a period of time, a couple weeks, and then about a month, then he told her that his mother had died. Well, he's 11 years old. What's he to think? He's not going to challenge his father, who's already a drunk. So he goes along with the story that his father told him. In actuality, his father had had his mother committed to a mental institution, which was, about a mile from where they were living at that point. The building is still there, by the way, in the outskirts of Bristol. So for the next 21 or 2 years, he believed that his mother had died. In the early 1930s, his father called him to come to England. His father was dying at that point. He went to England. His father told him that, oh, by the way, your mother's not dead. She's in a mental institution. Well, you can imagine his response. He was absolutely rocked on his heels. His father died. He buried the child. He got his mother out of the mental institution and set her up in a house. She lived by herself for the next more than 20 years. So clearly she was not incapacitated because she could take care of herself. She got very elderly. She lived to be well into her 90s. At a certain point, he moved her into an assisted living facility in Bristol. He had a very difficult relationship with her all his life. She never really grasped who he was. She always referred to him as Archie in her letters. And he signed his letters to her Archie, you know, which is understandable on one level. Her letters are very strange and kind of disconnected, and every sentence is like a different thought. There's no through line, particularly between what she's writing. And she was incapable basically of giving him the kind of love that he needed, which was unconditional love, because her love had conditions on it. If he didn't do what she wanted him to do, she would threaten to withdraw from him, and he'd be all alone in the world. And this,
Now, talking about the relationship with the mother
Yeah.
as compared to the relationship to the dad, because if the father said, "Mom's gone," what was his relationship like with his father, and how long did he stay in this strange relationship that was going on in this household?
he and his father didn't have much of a relationship. His father, at some point, contracted another relationship with a woman. We don't know exactly when that happened. It may have been the actual proximate cause for him committing his wife to a mental institution, because he had another woman on the side. He had a child with this woman. He was with her for the rest of his life. Basically, a bigamist, you know. So Archie didn't have a relationship with his father to speak of.
Did he physically live with the father, or was he
Lived with
separating himself?
lived with him until he got kicked out of school at the age of 14. The odd thing about Archie is he set himself on his path very early. He knew what he wanted. He wanted out of Bristol. He wanted to get away from his father. He wanted a life in the theater. He fell in love with the theater at an early age from going to the theater in Bristol, the Vaudeville and Music Hall Theater. The Hippodrome is still there, as a matter of fact. It's a beautiful theater. And he fell in love with the camaraderie of the performers, the intricate way they would back each other up, and the easy back and forth that performers have, the way they help each other out on stage and off stage, which was exactly what he was looking for in his family, and he never had, because his parents were always at him, and he was in the middle, and felt, you know, how do I duck? How do I get out of this? But he wanted to go in the theater. He quit. He got kicked out of school when he was 14, intentionally.
That was a funny story, wasn't it, about how he got kicked out of school?
Yeah. He got kicked out of school, and then he talked his father into signing him over as an apprentice to a well-known British theatrical group of tumblers called the Bob Pender Troupe, second generation troupe of tumblers. He wanted to be an acrobat, and his father signed the kid over in return for a stipend from the Bob Pender Troupe to the father. So he was making something out of it. And Archie was off and running, and he stayed with the Pender Troupe for 5 years at that point.
Is that how he then got to the United States, was by going?
The Pender Troupe came to America in 1920 and to work in American vaudeville. And then he came to New York, and he loved New York, and he loved America. And then he went to Pender and said, "I want to go back to England. I'm homesick." And Pender's gave him the money for his passage. And for actuality, he had no intention of going back to England. There was nothing there for him except his father, and he didn't care about his father. He just wanted to get away from Pender. He wanted to go into American vaudeville, and he took the money Pender had given him for his passage and used it to get an apartment in New York City.
So this is like he's still a teenager at this point, living on his own, or?
Oh yeah, he's 16 years old at this point. He's a little older than that. He's about 17 years old.
And really with little, if any, formal schooling. He's sort of a kid on the sly here.
His grades when he went to school were good. He was smart. His grades, there's a couple of report cards in his papers at the academy, and they're in the high 80s and low 90s, his grades. So he was very smart when he showed up. He just didn't particularly care to show up. He had his own priorities, and they didn't involve going to school and learning algebra and getting a job in Bristol. He wanted out. He had a sense of himself as due for a larger scenario.
So this life in vaudeville with the acrobat and other ways, did that give him certain skills that he was then able to translate into film?
Oh God, yeah. It gave him a confidence in his own body. It gave him control of his own body. He was a very expert. You can see it over and over in his films where he does nip-ups or somersaults or various little acrobatic things that he'll do to top a scene off at the end of a scene. He was extraordinarily limber. I mean, there's a movie he made when he was 54 years old called Indiscreet, where for no particular, lovely film, by the way, with Ingrid Bergman, where he throws in a jig, a very complicated jig scene. And it's just fascinating to watch him dance and to realize his physical dexterity hadn't dissipated at all over the years.
Isn't it also his sense of timing, Scott, that he was able to turn his head a certain way or pause? Did that come from his early vaudeville and acrobatic days?
I think most of his comedy, his sense of comedy came from vaudeville, because that's what he did in vaudeville. He was a comedian, a light leading man. After vaudeville, he hooked on with the Schubert organization in New York, and they used him as a second lead or a first lead in musicals for a couple of years. So there's a steady incremental sense of growth in his professional expertise all through the 1920s. And by end of 1931, he signs with Paramount Pictures and leaves the theater behind and goes out to Hollywood.
How did he make that switch? Did someone induce him to come to Hollywood, or did he just think, well, this is where I'm going to go next?
No, there was a contract. It paid, and he asked the Schuberts to release him, and they did, because I think he just thought it was the next thing, the next big thing. He tried vaudeville and he liked it, but the vaudeville, there was a ceiling as to how much you could make and how much security you could have. And in the theater, he wasn't a great singer. He sings in a couple movies and he's kind of warbly. He can get by, but he's not really a singer. So he's working towards a kind of vague goal of being a light leading man, I think. And he goes to Hollywood and he starts making movies, and he doesn't have a clue about what to do. In his first movies, you see him, he's sort of like an 8x10 glossy. He's very beautiful and handsome, but he doesn't project. There's no Cary Grant. You don't see a hint of Cary Grant. It takes.
When did he get this name, Cary Grant? Was that on his way to Hollywood, or when he arrives?
It's an amalgam. Cary was a name of a character he played in a Broadway musical with Fay Wray. The character's name was Cary. The show wasn't particularly successful. I think it ran 40 or 50 performances. But he liked the name, and he didn't want to use Archie Leach for obvious reasons. Archie Leach is the name of a vaudeville comedian. It's not the name of a leading man. Yes. So Cary sounded good, and Grant he just picked out of a standard list that Paramount gave him of surnames, of Anglo-Saxon surnames. Cary Grant, okay, and it was kind of a spur of the moment actually, but it worked for him. It worked for him because Cary is a kind of an English name. You don't see a lot of Americans named Cary. You never.
So this is the beginning of the reconstruct from Archie to Cary in the early 1930s when he goes to Hollywood.
1932. Yeah, he starts making movies in 1932, and he puts the pieces of Cary Grant together incrementally over the next 4 or 5 years. As I said, when he starts out, he's like an 8x10 glossy. He's gorgeous and he's standing there and he's charming, but he's not projecting anything. There's no energy, basically. He doesn't have.
Wasn't there a funny line, Scott, by Mae West about Cary Grant early on?
Sure. Well, why don't you come up sometime and see me? Yeah. He made 2 films with her, but when you worked with Mae West, she got all the lines. She wasn't going to give good lines to any other actor in a Mae West film. She had all the lines. So it was you basically stood there and she looked you up and down and and made her little moan of pleasure, and then got off a one-liner and fade out. We go to the next scene where she looks you up and down and makes another little moan of pleasure and gets off a line. So he puts Cary Grant together incrementally over 4 or 5 years, and he starts to show up. The character we know as Cary Grant starts to show up in 1935, 36, and by 1937 he's all there. The whole character,
the package,
the bounce, the verve. An occasional sense of duplicity, the energy. He's basically what happened. He said, I quote him in the book saying, the secret to comedy, the secret to acting is relaxation, which is very hard to do. It's very hard to do because unless you've got a lot of experience in front of a camera, the natural inclination is to freeze up, is to tighten up a little bit, and not make a fool of yourself, and it took him 20 movies, 15 movies before he learned, no, I have to project. I have to let it go. I have to use my vitality and my verve and my timing and my control of my body to express my character, not necessarily the character I'm playing, my character as a performer, because he wanted to devise he wanted to devise a performance, a performing persona that he could move from film to film to film, which was the style in those days.
Well, now there are a lot of leading female co-stars that he had. I mean, practically any name in Hollywood from the 30s to the 60s. But were there one or two or more that were his favorites, or that he felt he helped develop or helped develop him, that we could talk a little bit about?
His favorite leading lady was Grace Kelly, who he worked with in To Catch a Thief. He said it's like tennis. It's like playing catch. Acting, you throw the ball to somebody and they catch it and throw it back, and maybe put a little English on the ball. And he said, but a lot of actors, they can catch it, but they don't throw it back to you. He said, Grace really listened, because that's another thing. Other actors love an actor who's actually listening, not just waiting for their cue, but actually listening and reacting to what you're saying, you know? And he said, she really listened. Beyond that, he loved Grace Kelly. I mean, Ingrid Bergman. He loved Ingrid Bergman because she was so unpretentious. He said she would come to the studio with her hair pulled back, tied off with a shoelace. He said, and in jeans and a sweater. She didn't dress like a movie star. She didn't act like a movie star. When she came out to do the scene, it was Ingrid Bergman was there, but off camera, she was a person in full. You know, she was a real human being, as opposed to an actress who was always on. She was never on except when she was in front of the camera, and he loved that about her. He loved Irene Dunne because he thought she had the best timing that he ever saw, best comedy timing. And when you watch them together, it's really dazzling because she can keep up with him. Most actresses had trouble keeping up with him, you know?
What do you mean by that, Scott? Keeping up with him?
His energy, his energy level, that kind of quizzical way he had of watching another actor and raising their eyebrow, which could be interpreted as scene stealing. but she would just come right back at him. She wasn't cowed or intimidated by his level of energy. But even though she didn't try to necessarily compete with him in terms of energy, because she was very feminine, but she had a way of raising her eyebrow and sort of looking at him quizzically, like a wife does. Like yeah, you think you're hot, you're not so hot. I've got your number. It's that I've got your number look that she would give him that would bring him down a peg on film. And he loved that about her because she could catch the ball and throw it back and put some spin on it.
Well, what about Katharine Hepburn? Did she figure into this?
He liked her because she was brave. She'd do anything. She'd try anything. They did a wonderful movie called Bringing Up Baby. And she'd never done any tumbling or any acrobatics. And there's a scene where she's on his shoulders, you know, standing on his shoulders, and has to do a tuck and roll. And he said she'd never done anything like that. And she did it because she thought I wouldn't let anything bad happen to her. She was incredibly courageous, which is true. She wasn't scared of anything. And he loved that about her. He loved that about her because that's a difficult physical thing for a performer who doesn't have that level of physical expertise to ask them to do a fairly complicated acrobatic stunt. But she would do it, not use a stunt woman. She would do it herself.
Well, now I've heard that he had some sort of obsession. Maybe that's not the word, with Sophia Loren.
Well, she was the one that got away. You know, when Cary Grant turned on the charm, it was very hard to resist. The problem came after they'd established the relationship. That was when he had problems. It wasn't the seduction part wasn't difficult for him. It was the living part, the living with him. Yeah, they made two movies together. The first one was called Pride and the Passion, not a good film, made in Spain. And then they came back to Hollywood and did a movie called Houseboat together, a romantic comedy. And he fell really very hard for her in Spain when they were shooting Pride and the Passion. And she seemed to have fallen pretty hard for him too. The only problem was he was married at the time, and she was in a pre-existing relationship with Carlo Ponti, who she would eventually marry while they were shooting Houseboat.
Oh.
So it was difficult for him because he wasn't used to not getting what he wanted by that time. He was used to getting the movies he wanted to make and the money he wanted to make and the women he wanted to make, and he could not close the deal with Sophia Loren. And that was very difficult for him psychologically and emotionally.
Oh, well, now we've talked about his female co-stars, but an important part of this whole picture are the directors of the various films. Did he have favorite directors? If so, what did he like about them? What did he choose to do? Could he reject a film because he didn't like the director when career was established?
He was very picky about scripts. He turned down, his career would be entirely different if he'd done even a few of the films he turned down. He turned down Sabrina for Billy. He turned down everything Billy Wilder ever offered him. He turned down Sabrina. He turned down Love in the Afternoon. He turned down 1, 2, 3 for all those pictures for Billy Wilder. And Sabrina and Love in the Afternoon are slam dunks for him, and he wouldn't do them because he wasn't sure about Wilder. Wilder made him nervous because Wilder had sharp elbows. He could be a little cutting.
What does that mean? Had sharp elbows?
He could be a little verbally cutting, sarcastic.
Oh,
And Grant wanted a director to back him up, to support him. He didn't want a director that would give him a hard time. That was a real problem for him. He disliked even the slightest touch of any kind of abusive behavior on the part of a director. I suspect because of his parental relationships, frankly. So he liked Hitchcock because everything was organized completely, and he didn't have to worry about anything. Hitchcock, the script was set, the art direction was perfect, the cameraman was perfect, the leading ladies were perfect, because Hitchcock was a masterful filmmaker. He liked Leo McCarey because McCarey ran a very loose, casual set, a fair amount of improvisation. McCarey would play the piano between setups, and they'd sit around and sing or talk about the script or improvise lines.
but that seems so antithetical to Hitchcock. So he was comfortable with both types?
It's a different kind of movie. Hitchcock's making suspense movies with touches of humor. Leo McCarey was making comedies, basically.
Oh, okay.
And Howard Hawks was making comedies, and Hawks was another cool customer. Hawks never raised his voice. McCarey never raised their voices. Hitchcock never raised his voice. They were all very much relaxed and apparently casual. There's nothing casual about making a movie. They all knew what they were doing. They just had different styles. But he liked the fact that they had an easy way of handling actors. He didn't like dictatorial directors, and he liked to have a loose rein. He liked a loose rein. And with Wilder, who he continually refused to work with, Wilder, you could not improvise. You had to say the lines as written in the script. And Grant liked to play around with lines, and get different rhythms going, and maybe try something in rehearsal, And Wilder wanted the script performed as written. That was rule number one on the Billy Wilder set. But I think basically he just didn't like Wilder's manner.
Well, now we talked about earlier on his very difficult, troubled childhood. And I've come to know that he had 5 different wives in difficult marriages. And we don't need to go through all these different wives, but was there some common characteristic here? Something he was choosing wives that, he said he was better at picking scripts than wives. What was it about these women?
Very true. Well, for one thing, he was attracted to actresses, which is always a problem if you're an actor, because there's only so much oxygen in any household. And if you've got 2 performers in the same household, somebody's going to get more oxygen than the other person. Very few show business marriages are long term, especially if you're in the movies. If you're a movie star, I can think of maybe 4 or 5 successful show business movie star marriages. Paul Newman and Joanna Woodward, a couple others. But he kept marrying actresses who were ambitious and had careers. And he wanted the focus, I think, he would never have said this, but I think he wanted to be the main focus of his wife's attention. And he really didn't accomplish that till his last marriage, his 5th marriage, to a much younger woman who was perfectly willing to play all the different roles that he always wanted a woman to play: mother, a foreman, mistress, companion, all these different parts. But actresses had careers to worry about and other issues to worry about, and the marriages all broke up. And
he was married to Betsy Drake for a pretty long time, though, wasn't he?
They were married. That was the longest of his marriages. They were married for 13 years, 14 years, long time, long time.
And then with Diane Cannon, he finally had a child, his only child, Jennifer, but that marriage didn't last very long either.
That was about a year and a half, 2 years. That was a real fast one because Diane Cannon was a young actress. She wanted to have a career. He wanted her home taking care of the kid, and she wanted to have a career. And she's a delightful comedian. You know, very funny actress. If he'd worked with her, I think he would have enjoyed it a great deal. Unfortunately, he married her, and he didn't enjoy her a great deal.
Well, I've heard that there was some talk about his homosexuality or being bisexual. Is there anything we can say, no, it wasn't true? Maybe it was, maybe it had an effect on his marriages, maybe it didn't.
That's been a topic of conversation for, I don't know, 30 or 40 years before he died. He died in 1986, by the way, not 1966. He was 82.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was 82 when he died. Do I think he was gay? No, I don't think he was gay. I don't think any gay man gets married 5 times. They can figure themselves out long before they get married 5 times. Was he 100% heterosexual? Who knows? You know, it doesn't really matter. He was. There was nothing particularly fey about him off screen, certainly. Or any
Well,
more
now,
than he was on screen.
we've heard that he didn't have the best of relationships with either of his parents. What was his relationship like with his daughter, Jennifer?
Idyllic. He devoted himself to. He quit show business to raise her. They had he and Diane Cannon split custody. Diane Cannon had primary custody. He had her for a number of weeks per year, and basically he quit show business after she was born. He walked away, and he was still very popular, and I mean, still got a lot of offers. He just turned them all down because he'd done it. He felt the people that he really enjoyed working with were getting old, and Hitchcock was going downhill. His films weren't very good. McCary was retired. Howard Hawks was doing John Wayne movies. The people that he enjoyed working with weren't working anymore, and he felt he was getting too old. He felt, especially for a romantic leading man, he didn't want to push it. In life, he didn't mind dating 25 and 30-year-old girls, women. Professionally, he thought it looked bad. He thought he thought everybody was looking at his double chin, you know, and he still looked lovely. He looked 50, as I write in the book. I think he looked 40 for 15 years, then he looked 50 for another 10. But his hair was getting very gray, and he'd retained his lithe build, but he didn't want to necessarily make love to 28 and 30-year-old women. He thought it looked bad. He didn't mind doing it, as I said, off screen, but
Yeah,
on screen it bothered him. It bothered him.
Was he an overly protective dad? Was he indulgent? I mean, what role model did he have to go by?
No, he wasn't. He was indulgent, but he wasn't indulgent. She had to she had to earn her own money. She had to get a job as soon as she was old enough to work. He paid for half of a car. She had to buy the other half, pay for the other half of the car. So he made her ante up. He made her pay her own taxes, you know, from the money she was earning. She had to do quarterly income tax payments. He could easily have had his accountant take care of that. No, she had to take care of it herself. So he was very attentive about building a sense of responsibility for her, into her, that he wasn't going to be around forever, and that these are things she had to be attentive to, because he also knew she was going to be wealthy. He was going to leave her a lot of money, you know, when he died. And because he was so much older, he was 62 when she was born. He knew that he might not necessarily be around to see her have children and be married and all that. So he wanted her on the right path, as he understood the right path to be. So he was very indulgent and very loving, and I don't think she could have done anything that would have really outraged him except go into show business. That was when he brought the hammer down. Between her, she was going to Stanford, and between 2 of the years she went there, she applied for a scholarship at the neighborhood playhouse in New York City. And when he found out, he told her that he didn't want her in show business, and that he wouldn't pay for next year at Stanford if she took the scholarship at the neighborhood playhouse. So when that was a tripwire for him. He really didn't want to going into show business because he thought it was a very hard way to make a living, but he wouldn't give her the freedom to make up her own mind about what she wanted to do. She became an actress after he died,
Oh,
actually.
really? Was
Yeah.
she successful? Was she good at it, or? No.
She's very beautiful. She looks like a feminine version of him. She's dark and kind of gypsy-ish, very lovely. But no, she wasn't particularly successful. I suspect because she was wealthy. She didn't have to work. She didn't have that poor person's hunger to make it in show business, where you wait on tables, you do what you have to do, and you go after every part, because even if it's not maybe the perfect part for you, because you're trying to build a resume. If she didn't like a part, she told me, she said, if I didn't like a part, I didn't go after it. So I don't think he had the hunger,
Was there?
because what he had done was by giving her half his estate, what he had done was essentially make her wealthy and taken away her hunger to be professionally expert and to be a player as an actress. So she didn't really go after it 100%.
Just a little side note here. Parts of your book mention about how, I guess the word is cheap, Cary Grant could be, because you say he was very generous with his daughter. I understood he was generous with friends, but I was surprised to hear about this cheap streak that he had. Where did that come from?
Well, he was poor as a kid. That's where it came. Most people that are cheap, it comes from an impoverished childhood. He didn't have any money. He never had to worry about a meal. I mean, they always had food, but things were tight, very tight. He remembered once when they were living in a rented house, and the man came to collect the rent, came to the front door to collect the rent, and his father didn't have the rent, and he remembered how embarrassed his father was, and that transferred itself to him. So what he evolved was he was cheap about small things. He was generous about large things. He would lend a friend thousands of dollars without thinking about it and not worrying about getting it back. But he would hoard rubber bands, for instance. The Los Angeles Times always came with a rubber band around it, and he had 500 of these rubber bands in a drawer. Why? But that was the kind of thing. He would keep old clothes. When he died, he had storage lockers full of old clothes that he hadn't given away. And he still could fit into them, but that's not the point. They were out of style, or had a hole in them or something.
Yeah.
But he kept them. He kept all of his old clothes, and his daughter ended up giving them away, taking them to thrift stores all across Los Angeles. People were buying Cary Grant's clothes, and they didn't know it.
Well, I heard that at one point he had house guests and he would charge them for toilet paper or something.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Yeah, Douglas Fairbanks told me that story. Doug Fairbanks Jr. told me that story. Yeah.
That's really funny.
And phone call. If someone was staying at his house and made phone calls, he would get their money for the long distance phone calls. So as I said, he was cheap about small things like that, but he lent Clifford Odets a lot of money over a lot of years. He always got it back. Odets paid it back, but Odets wasn't particularly good with money, and he had a daughter who was had a lot of medical problems, and he spent a huge amount of money on doctors. And Grant would always advance him money, and Odets always paid it back. Odets was his best friend in California, in Los Angeles. And I suspect the reason that what drew them together was they were both essentially dissatisfied with themselves on some primary level. Although Odets, of course, was a major American playwright, and Grant was a major world movie star, they both had certain insecurities in common.
Well, maybe that leads me into the discussion of his use of LSD, because that was something I didn't know anything about. And what sort of prompted him to go into that, and what did he think he got out of it, if anything, and how long did this go on?
He went into it because nothing else had worked. He had tried psychotherapy. He didn't like it. It didn't work for him. His problem was, as he said, Cary Grant really didn't have any problems. All my problems were Archie Leach's problems. Why then was he beset emotionally by Archie Leach's problems decades after he stopped being Archie Leach? But he still felt like that. He still had that level of anxiety that he'd had as a young performer under his own name, even in the 1940s and 50s when he's a world famous movie star, making huge amounts of money. So all the conventional things of the time hadn't worked for him. And a number of people were trying LSD, especially amongst the British expats in Los Angeles, people like Aldous Huxley. LSD was very popular in the 50s, 40s and 50s. So he tried it, he liked it, and he felt it made a huge difference in his life in that he was able to, it reordered his thinking about who he was and the kind of person he was. It's very interesting. And it became actually Captain Trips. He proselytized for, this is at a point when it's legal. It hadn't been
Yeah.
outlawed. This is
Mhm.
late 50s, early 60s. And he would proselytize for it. People would go to him who were thinking of dropping acid and ask him about it. And he almost invariably would recommend they try it under supervision, under medical supervision. He did it a lot. He did over 100, well over 100 trips for a long time under supervision. And then he would do it on his own. He would just have it at home. And he felt he could control it. He only had really 1 or 2 or 3 bad trips. It was generally a positive experience for him. The odd thing was is that he felt it made a big difference in his life. It enabled him to accept who he was and to unify Cary with Archie. The people that worked with him didn't really see much difference at all. he
What
still
about
he still seemed to be the same person, nervous.
what about his wives? I mean, how did they
I-
behave?
I look, he was, when he started doing acid, he was in his middle 50s. He was not a kid.
Okay.
And this was Betsy Drake got him into it. He was still married to her at the time, and she had experimented with it, I believe. And his marriage after that was to Diane Cannon, and that was a train wreck.
Mhm.
And he wanted her to try it, and she didn't want to do it. And she tried it, and she had a bad trip, and it really terrified her.
Mhm.
And he was still nudging her. It was like an initiation thing that he wanted her to take part in, to share what he had experienced, but she didn't have that experience. She had a bad experience with it. So that was a bone of contention between the two of them. But he was very set in his ways. Psychologically and emotionally, it helped him. It didn't seem to make any difference at all in terms of the way he behaved to the world at large.
Was he a protege of Timothy Leary? Did they have
No.
any relationship?
Leary went to see him. Leary's correspondence is very interesting. Leary wrote him a letter. He saw Leary. They had a meeting at Grant's office at Universal. This is in 1962, 63. Leary was working on a script about LSD, and Grant said he would love to do it if he could come up with a script. He would love to proselytize for LSD to the world at large. But he seemed to be leery of Leary. Because Leary wrote him afterwards, and Grant didn't respond. So he seemed to feel Leary might have been a little dodgy, because while they had a perfectly cordial meeting, and he said he wanted to see Leary's script, he disappeared after that. He ghosted Leary after that.
Mhm. Okay. We talked in the beginning about this movie Suspicion, which I think was released in 1941. And there's some interesting overlap in some of the things you've talked about today, because the director for this was Alfred Hitchcock.
His first
And
film.
oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. And we're going to be talking to Christina Lane towards the end of February about Joan Harrison, someone I knew nothing at all about. So is there some insight you can give us into that film? Because I've just seen film clips of it. And the library, of course, for those listening, does have copies of the film, DVD. I think you can also get it streaming. It's 1941 film, so I think it's available. But is there something about that film? It seems Hitchcock was really being masterful, even if it was just his first film with Cary Grant.
Well, it was an interesting part. It was Joan Fontaine's first film after winning the Oscar for Rebecca. So she had become a star, and she was working again with Hitchcock, who had directed Rebecca. But it's a very bleak. It's a kind of a savage little character study. He's a kind of a society wastrel, and he marries her, and she's got money, and she starts to think that he's going to kill her, that he's a killer, and he married her for her money. He's going to bump her off to get the estate. And at the end, it turns out that he's not a killer, and she's a bit of a clinical paranoid. And he really loved her, but he was insecure, and she interpreted his insecurity as murderous. in reality, the original script, he was going to kill her because he is a murderer. And the ending was to be that as she's taken the poison and she realizes she's going to die, and she writes a letter to the police. She writes a letter saying what has just happened, explaining that she's been murdered by her husband, and she puts it on the mantle. And after she dies, Grant, covers her up in bed, pulls the sheet over her, and goes out whistling. And he sees the letter on the mantle, takes it out, and as he goes down the street, he drops it in the post office box. So he's going to get caught. It was a little shock twist ending, but the problem is that he would go unpunished. As far as the film was concerned, the character Johnny would be unpunished, which you could not do under the production code, the censorship code at that time. So they had to rejigger the ending to do a reverse to where he's not murderous. He means well, but he's in debt and he's trying to get money, but he's not killer. So they had to rewrite the ending and reshoot the ending several times in order to get it past the censors. And it was a kind of a dry run for what they would do with Notorious a few years later, when they were rewriting while they were shooting the movie. Very difficult and inefficient way to make a movie, because the central core of Notorious is Ingrid Bergman is basically a prostituting herself for the FBI. She's sleeping with a Nazi in order to get incriminating evidence so the FBI can take him, can arrest him. But she's a prostitute in essence. And this was a real problem again for the censorship. So they had to do a lot of rewriting on that as well. But they managed to get it under the wire without castrating the movie. Suspicion, they kind of had to semi-castrate the script in order to, but it's the first glimpse really of a very dark, bleak Cary Grant, which he would bring out on occasion with None But the Lonely Heart, the movie he did with Clifford Odets, Notorious, and the other Hitchcock movie. There's a couple films where he played bleak and bitter, and he's very effective because he could access that easily from his childhood experiences as Archie.
Well, it'll be interesting then to talk to Christina about Joan, one of the screenwriters for that film, to see how they massage, shall we say, or manage that script to make it work.
Good word. Massaged is a good word.
I think we have some questions for you, Scott. Amanda is managing that process. So Amanda, do you have questions for Scott?
Yes, it looks like someone has asked, did you interview the daughter for your information?
Yes, I did.
Wonderful. I do encourage anyone that has any questions, may have any questions, to feel free to submit them through the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. I see a lot of raising hands at the moment. And also, I just wanted to note, I'm going to include a link where you can purchase a signed copy of Scott's book through our local bookstore, Savoy.
Thank you, Amanda. So are people starting to get the idea they got to write out their questions now, that there's no speaking out in this format?
Yes. So I have another question. Can you tell us about his relationship with Randolph Scott?
They met at Paramount in 1932. They were both bachelors. They had an apartment, a house rather, in Hollywood. Cary got married to Virginia Cherelle, the leading lady of Charlie Chaplin's City Lights. They got married. He and Cherelle got a house of their own. That marriage broke up in about a year. And he moved back in with Randy Scott. They got a place together on Santa Monica Beach. They lived together, all told, for just about 8 years, until Grant married Barbara Hutton, the world's richest woman. There's been a lot of speculation over the years about the relationship. Carol Lombard said it was perfectly above board. Randy Scott spent the money and Cary saved the money. So it was a way to save money, is what she said. Other people weren't so sure.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I have another question. Is there one particular aspect of Cary Grant that made you want to write a book about him?
Hmm. Well, that's we're choosing a subject is I tend to circle for a long time, and the circles get smaller as I get closer. But I don't leap into it anymore like I did 20 years ago. It takes me a long time because I'm older now, and I've only got how many more books can I write? So is this book worth writing? Is this person worth writing? And I read everything that's been written about them, and if there's a really good book that's been written about them, I pass because there's no sense in. I'm not in the redundancy business. But I thought the books about Cary Grant were in the main sleazy and completely irrelevant to who he was as a performer. So I thought, sure, I'll do it. But what got me, the eureka moment. Sometimes there's a eureka moment, and sometimes there isn't. But I had a eureka moment with Cary Grant. He kept a diary when he was 14 for about 4 or 5 months. And what's interesting about it is he doesn't mention his mother. She's in the insane asylum. He thinks she's dead. So there's no reason for him to mention her. There's 1 or 2 passing references to his father, but nothing of any content. Basically what he's doing is cutting school and going to theater and going to movies, going to the music hall and going to movies. And he writes down what he thinks of the acts, and he writes down a little bit about the movies. But basically what he responds to is the acts he's seeing in the music hall. And he'll mention fish and chips. I had 2 orders of fish and chips for dinner. But basically what comes across is he's a street kid. He's not really at home very much. He's certainly not at school very much at all. And he's completely self-contained. He's out there on his own, making his own decisions, moving clearly away from any kind of conventional adolescence. He's not interested in the conventional adolescence. He's moving towards show business because that's all he cares about is seeing all the acts at the music hall. So he gets a job, a gopher job at one of the music halls, so he can get in for free and see the acts for free and not have to pay for them. Like I did as a kid when I wanted to see movies for free. There's only one way to see movies for free. That's to be a movie critic. So it's not that I had a huge urge to be a movie critic. I just had a huge urge to see movies for free. So, but he's doing the same thing. And I thought, well, he's a street kid, but now what made him so self-contained and so indifferent to the path that 13 and 14-year-olds generally take? Generally, they do what their parents tell them to do. He wasn't doing that. He was on his own, psychologically, emotionally, practically. He was on his own. And that was the same year, as I said, he got kicked out of school, which is clearly intentional, and joined the acrobatic troupe, and he was gone. And that was it. He was done. He divorced Bristol, he divorced England, and he divorced that life that he'd been born into. And what intrigued me was the self-possession that he showed, the refusal to follow the conventional path, which most people do, especially when you're that age. You do what your parents tell you to do. You may do it grudgingly, but essentially you do what your parents tell you to do. No, he didn't do that. Archie didn't do that. Archie was on his own, psychologically and emotionally. And that was the beginning of why he was so successful. Because he was, I say in the book, he was the cat that walked by himself. Absolutely the cat. He's not a dog. If people are dogs or cats, Archie Leach is a cat. He kept his own counsel. He made his own decisions. He decided who he would be friends with and who he wouldn't be friends with. And I like that. That's an interesting trait to have developed at such an early age. Very interesting trait for a kid. A lower middle class kid born into mean circumstances, to roll the dice with himself and not worry about getting a conventional job to bring some money in and a roof over his head. No. He already decided to be a kid on the road and be a performer. It shows a lot of maturity and a lot of self-possession, an unusual amount. And that's actually the moment when I said, well, I think I got to do this.
That's a wonderful answer, Scott. Thank you. I think we have one more question that we have time for at the moment. And just a reminder too, there is a link there where you can purchase Scott's book. I've just sent it through the chat. Someone is wondering, did Grant adopt an Upper English class accent, or was it his original accent?
It's not his original accent. The Bristol accent, the accent he's born with, he had to get rid of, because the Bristol accent is a working class accent. It's absolutely, if you're going to play farm, and especially in that era, you didn't want to have a laborer's accent, because that would limit the kind of parts you could play in the English theater, because actors had to have that Oxford English accent. They had to sound like Leslie Howard or Noel Coward. And he didn't sound like Leslie Howard, because the accent he was born with is definitively working class. So he worked very hard to get rid of it. What he came up with, the Pender troupe, the troupe of acrobats he was with, had a lot of Cockney kids in it. So there's a touch of Cockney in there. But basically what he did was obliterate the Bristol accent, adopt a little bit of a Cockney accent he picked up from the other kids in the Pender troupe, and he went with a kind of mid-Atlantic accent. But a lot of English people don't really think his accent is English at all, because it doesn't derive from any known area of England. It's something he came up with. Frankly, I think a lot of it is just spending 12 years in America from 1920 to 1932 before he goes into Hollywood and we see him and we can hear him. He spent 12 years here, and I think he picked up, he had a great ear, of course, in the same way he had complete control of his body. He had a wonderful ear, because most actors do have a wonderful ear. They can imitate accents very easily. And I think he picked up, and it softened the experience of American small towns and American vaudeville. I think it softened what was probably his attempt to imitate the upper class accents of actors like Noel Coward and A.E. Matthews, actors that he respected and admired when he was a young acrobat. And he kind of put it all together, and out came that weird kind of Cary Grant accent that isn't English. It's not American. It's Cary Grant.
Wonderful. I think I'll try to squeeze in just one more question, actually, if that's all right. Somebody has noted that they read a New York Times article comparing the actors of Cary Grant's era to modern actors like Pacino and De Niro. It stated that they would never strut their screen persona before the public eye the way that Grant did. Can you comment on that?
Well, the style is so different. That came about in the 1950s with Brando in the Actors Studio, where which was actually a reaction against actors like Grant, who had a persona that tended to be repeated film after film after film, where the character was subsumed into the personality of the performer, as opposed to the other way around. It was the difference between the Hollywood method of having actors that could replicate a given trait of a given group of traits. For instance, Clark Gable, he's always kind of scampish and a bit of a rogue, and looks at a woman like he knows he could have her. And he's like that in almost every movie. That's replicated because they were writing, because they found that audiences liked it, because women liked him and men wanted to be like him. So he appealed to both men and women. So once he figured out what he could present himself as, and once they found the audience liked it, that's what they wrote too. All the scripts emphasized that roguishness that Clark Gable could project. When the New York actors came in, Brando, Montgomery Clift, later on De Niro and Pacino, the object is not to replicate a series of behavioral tics in film after film after film. The object is to illuminate the character, the individual character you happen to be playing in that movie. So it's a 180-degree different emphasis in performance theory, really. And I don't think one is better than the other. One is more realistic than the other, shall we say? But I don't think either one. It's two different periods in American filmmaking. That's all. And there are still actors who kind of adhere to the earlier tradition. I think George Clooney, not always, but George Clooney has a certain sense of, whether he's playing a comedy or a drama, he has a certain similarity of manner in a presentation, that's a little bit reminiscent of the gliding quality that Cary Grant had. It's in films like the Ocean's 11 movies. And even in movies that are much heavier dramas, he often plays a guy who has the facade of a very smooth, sophisticated guy, but inside he's panicking, you know, and that's something Grant did very well. So both traits still exist. The New York School of Acting is much more prevalent now, though, and has been for the last 50 or 60 years.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott. I just want to say on behalf of the library, of course, the Friends of the Library, and also the attendees, thank you so much for joining us this evening, and to you, Mary, as well, for moderating.
You're welcome.
Certainly speak for myself when I say this has been really enlightening and very cool. Very, very cool. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me, and enjoy the book.
We did. Thank you.